And now, a show that needs no introduction.
Huh?
What?
But while The Simpsons is considered one of the greatest and most influential television programs of all time, it's widely acknowledged that it's not as good as it once was, which is inevitable considering it survived nearly 3 decades on air. There are people who will say that the show should have ended a long time ago, but I don't think that at all. I find it comforting that in a world where so much can change, one of the great classics of American television lives on. And besides, there aren't a lot of outright bad episodes, so it's certainly not making us worse off. Since the 10th season onward era Simpsons doesn't seem to get much love, I thought I'd make a video showcasing the best that modern Simpsons has to offer. And with 16 going on 17 years to work with, that was no easy feat. Here's my pick for the top 10 Simpsons season 10 onward. Homer and Flanders, bounty hunters. The pitch sells itself. They do everything with this premise, and it is so much fun to watch. At times, it's genuinely captivating. This was the premiere for The Simpsons' Platinum season, and it turned out to be a pretty good season overall, at least in my opinion. There's a subplot where Marge becomes an erotic baker that's not quite as enticing, but it was nice to see The Simpsons go into more adult content without necessarily going into Family Guy territory. It tries something new. The Homer and Ned plot is amazing. I kind of want there to be a sequel to this episode. Something tells me they didn't do nearly as much with this as they could fit into a 22-minute episode. I wasn't raised by television in the conventional sense of the term, but as a poor homeschooled boy from the country, I learned a lot about the real world from The Simpsons. It was through this series that I learned a lot about real world issues, including gay marriage. Homer's phobia was a little before my time, in that I was one when it first aired, but this episode I remember watching live, and on repeats thanks to VHS recording. It was astonishing to me as an 8-year-old that these prejudices existed in the real world, and like my parents were raising me right, and this episode makes a good case for its moral without sacrificing the cynicism and subversive nature that makes a lot of good Simpsons episodes. Take how they treat Patty, who comes out in this episode. They don't make her out to be a martyr, and they don't demonize her for it. She's the same character with a new character trait, and that's good how they kept her the same bitter character, and it's funny that way. Now, this episode isn't perfect, especially for someone like me who was really sensitive to the heavy-handed morals and stuff, but it definitely goes on the list for representing what this and shows like it mean to me. They help me become more aware and develop as a person, and yes, that is sad, shut up, not all of us got to go to Europe for the summer. I like it when Comic Book Guy gets a character. Maybe that's just because I find it bizarre that geeks can be the butt of everyone's joke in an era where Game of Thrones is the most popular show on television, and Star Wars outgrossed Avatar, which outgrossed Titanic. CBG's romance with a Japanese manga artist is really well written, and most importantly, I love that they managed to stay a couple. I would have put Eenie, Teeny, Maya, Mo on this list if Mo and Maya had stayed a couple at the end, given a happy ending to a sad sack character we've seen suffer for a long time. The Simpsons has been on the air for almost 3 decades, and I kinda like it when shows with this much longevity under their belt take some risks when it comes to changing the canon. So I think it's good for the fictional couple to get their happy ending even featured into subsequent episodes. And also, the Studio Ghibli tribute is as whimsical as it is blatantly fan service. I know I spent the previous century talking about how tiring it is that geeks are the butt of everyone's jokes, but yeah, this is one of the funniest episodes of The Simpsons I've ever seen. And this is probably the most obscure choice for this list, but it had among the highest batting average of jokes I've ever seen. And that's why it's my list, it's my opinion. The second half is the one that takes place at a comic convention, and the jokes should be trite to a modern audience, but it's not as egregious as one would expect. I'm going to kick myself for placing it this high on the list, I'm sure, but I think it definitely deserves a shout. So, there are going to be 2 episodes from the current season on this list. And I didn't actually want to put current seasons on here because these episodes are too fresh in my memory. I've had a lot more time to conceptualize and think about something like My Big Fat Geek Wedding, which I grew up with, to something I saw just a few weeks ago. That being said, these 2 episodes I feel were just really great and ambitious, and I think they were effective and history will look on them well. We'll get to the second one later on this list, but the first one is Barthood. I liked Barthood a lot more than the movie it was parodying. Yeah, sure, Boyhood was a technical and emotional feat, but by and large, I found the whole thing underwhelming. The lead was the least likable character, and yeah, there's this one white savior moment that kinda got under my skin. But Barthood solves my qualms by focusing on a character we already know and like. I like the future episodes of The Simpsons because, in part, it shows them outside their comfort zone and they can do good things there. There's something cathartic about watching this character who is perpetually 10 grow up before our eyes. And there's something about the lack of future technology jokes that makes this more intimate, more realistic, and most importantly, more touching. I remember the hype for The Simpsons' 400th episode. Me and my family were vacationing in South Padre Island at the time, which was not that far a drive from our house, but whatever. And we gathered in our hotel room to watch the event live. And we actually thought that the former of the two episodes airing was the 400th, and then the latter actually ended up being kind of disappointing as far as a 400th episode is concerned. But 24 minutes will always be the 400th episode to us. And to me, The Simpsons is a show that can't really jump the shark because it was never that grounded in reality to begin with. A couple of them come close in a sort of non-conventional way, but think about this. Homer Goes to Space is considered one of The Simpsons' best episodes, and there are many reasons for that, but the biggest one in my opinion is that the show treats it so casually. This isn't some big game changer. This isn't the time where everything changes. This isn't even Fonzie jumping the shark. It's just another day in the life of the Simpsons clan. It's no different here. When you see the counter-truancy unit introduced and you see those timers count down, you just go along with it. The show takes it so casually and you know that it knows what it's doing. Modern pop culture references always date the episode. It was my only, and a lot of people's biggest, criticism with the Comedy Central era Futurama. And sometimes the references are dated the moment they air because an episode takes so long to produce.
And all the movies they're making fun of are over a year old. It's like those parodies were written when the movies came out, but it took so long to animate them that we look dated and hacky. Why can't we... Oh!
However, this episode works because it does everything right in that respect. The pop culture references are background for the real plot, which is to see all these characters working together on a caper. It could have been about anything they wanted. It could have been about illegal shrimp farming, for Christ's sake, but they chose young adult fiction factory writing, a la Carolyn Keene. And it's a lot of fun to watch these characters working together, and they have some scathing bites at the publishing industry. And of course, we have Neil fucking Gaiman, a treasure to the human race. The Simpsons guy is considered one of the best episodes of Family Guy, so saith IMDb. And one of the reasons for that, I think, was because The Simpsons was a rising tide that lifted up Family Guy from their perpetual seasonal rot. Futurama acted as something similar to The Simpsons in this bizarre crossover. I am a huge Futurama fan, and I would kill all the Simpsons writers for one more Futurama season. Moving on, seeing the crew one last time is invaluable to me. I was praying for this crossover not to suck, and it blew me away with how good it was. That Seymour gag sucked, though. There is a certain emotional feeling that classic Simpsons has that modern Simpsons does not. Think about episodes like Marge Be Not Proud. In a lot of the scenes, it's a borderline straight drama with not much humor. Those episodes have emotional depth, and they pack a wallop that is lost on a lot of the modern Simpsons era episodes. And this is the episode that I think brings it all back. Now, this is the first canonical Halloween episode The Simpsons has ever done, and it's beautiful. One of the problems with Simpsons longevity is that we tend to forget that the Simpsons kids are, well, kids. This episode shows a good example of Lisa being portrayed like a normal 8-year-old, which is something we tend to forget. And I think the writers kind of do, to be honest. Maybe it's just because I live out in the country, but home invasion is a terrifying concept to me, and this episode has a pretty brutal portrayal of it. And I just want to add, the threat is real. The invaders are real. There's no wacky misunderstanding, no Mr. Jenkins taking off the mask at the end. This is a real situation, with the only mitigating factor being that, well, they're stoners. Louis had an episode where something similar happened, and it was just as unsettling to watch Louis and his daughters in a real threat. And The Simpsons is billed as a family show. Homer's attempts to shield Lisa from the reality and the gravity of the situation is as hilarious as it is heartwarming and heartbreaking. I want to point out that this is one of the few episodes of The Simpsons I can think of that has one plot and sticks with it all the way, which really adds to the scale and gravity of everything. I don't actually mind the cuts from the main plot to the Bart and Marge plot, because they actually help to diffuse the tension, which, at least to me, got pretty unbearable. And what better way to do that than with a Rocky Horror-inspired musical number about adult Halloween? Honestly, this episode is just amazing, and like I said before, the only reason this is a number one is because it just wouldn't be fair when going over 17 years of content to pick the one episode that has the least amount of time for me to pick out the plot holes. But I really do think history will look good on this episode. It is remarkable. And now, before we get to number one, here's a couple of honorable mentions. My Pods and Boomsticks. This is the first episode of The Simpsons to feature Islam in a major role, and they've even done one about Scientology. That's mostly trivia, but it still makes for something new, even in season 20. I also think the idea that a Muslim man does blow up buildings, but because he's a demolition specialist, is hilarious. That is a twist that will never be not funny to me. Behind the Laughter. This is one of those fourth wall breaking episodes like the 138th episode Spectacular, and the sheer observation of Simpson mania from the inside leads to some comedy gold. I've heard this episode get some flack for being too meta, but that's what really sells it for me. Something self-aware at the height of the Simpsons dorkage. Coming to Homerica. Like the gay marriage episode, this is kinda relevant again due to a certain sentient pumpkin man's rhetoric. Yeah, I'm Mexican, so sue me. I don't want to be a statistic in some hate crime if I ever visit Alabama. These Norwegian stereotypes are hilarious, by the way. Eternal Moonshine of the Simpson Mind. This is just really cool and psychedelic. I'd give it a watch if you want to see something that's ambitious, weird, and works. Like Halloween Horror, this is one of the few Simpsons episodes that sticks with the main plot. Weekend at Burnsies. You know, for the longest time, I thought that in this episode, Homer was smoking tobacco. I was a very stupid child. I kinda have issues with the pacing of this one because the second half kinda seems entirely a separate episode from the first half, but that's more than made up for with Dancing Puppet Burns. I could watch an entire episode of, an actual Weekend at Bernie's plot. Midnight Towboy. This episode, at the time, I remember for having a lot more adult humor in it than typical Simpsons fare. Back then, I guess I could see I was a little sensitive. I think the fact that the title was a reference to an X-rated movie didn't help either. Watching it again after a couple of years, the humor really holds up. They do the Homer going mad with power plot pretty well. I feel like it deserves a shout out. They saved Lisa's brain. This episode is just so ridiculous, I can't help but love it. The Mensa members taking over Springfield is just great. Stephen Hawking cameos are always appreciated. Yeah, I love this timeline where Stephen Hawking can just do cartoons and stuff. The seemingly never-ending story. This one is just a very creative plot, and I love the way that the plots kind of add sympathy and depth to the characters, especially Moe and Mr. Burns. If I were to rank the honorable mentions, this would probably be number 1. And this actually would have been number 11, and I would have made this a top 11 list, but I don't have that much to say about it. This is an episode best watched just going in and watching the events unfold. It's just a good episode, so I do encourage you to watch it yourself. For the record, number 12 on a top 12 list probably would have been Behind the Laughter. Where did Holidays of Future Past come from? Holy shit. This episode came out of nowhere when I first saw it. It was such a pleasant episode, I could hardly even gush over it. It was so good, I can't even talk about one thing about it. I remember the episodes before and after this being especially kind of mediocre, so this just amazing piece of content coming out was just so incredible. The time-lapse sequences as the characters age are fun to watch, and it shows that there's no gimmick to this future episode. There's no time portal, no fortune teller, nothing that Mr. Frink is doing. Just age up the characters, look into the future, show us that this is happening to them. The big selling point of this episode is just the sheer charm and the love and the effort that was clearly put into creating this. The scenes like Bart and Lisa talking about parenting in the treehouse, they're very poignant, they're very fun to watch, and they really make you think about the history of the show. I really can't talk about this too much without just gushing. You probably might know that this episode was written as a potential series finale, but then the series got renewed and fortunately gave us number 2 on this list, but still, I'm glad that they didn't retcon this. I am glad that they went all out, and I am glad that they made just the most heartwarming and best and just beautiful idea for a Simpsons episode. On an objective scale, yeah, I do like Halloween of Horror more, but this is the greatest Simpsons episode, I think, of all time, not even just of postseason 10. And I am not exaggerating that for a second. It is beautiful. It is amazing. Those were my picks for the top 10 modern Simpsons episodes. What did you think of the list? Did you like my choices? Did you think my Big Fat Geek Wedding was derivative and shit? What video should I do next? Seriously, I have no idea what I should do next. Leave a comment in the video below. Subscribe if you want to encourage the madness yet to come, and be sure to share the video with all your friends. I'll see you next time. Ciao. Did I really just snap my goddamn fingers? What the fuck?